Good day and welcome, America. Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Patriotism in action, putting America first and New World Order dead last. A proud protectionist. Let's get right to it. And we're going to go beyond Cain, although Cain is still raising Cain and still in the cover-up mode. Certainly not a candid candidate, to say the least. Now, some interesting things that, well, these are little side notes, little factoids. But the complaint was filed against Cain, and maybe some of you have already heard this, in the ninth month of 99. There you go, 999. So I wonder if there have been 999 women that have been flattered. Now, I don't know if he's an aggressor. I don't even know if he's a harasser. Now, might we call them accusers or abusers if in fact they were out to make a name or make money? But I don't think so. Cain was, yeah, okay, so he was president of the National Restaurant Association. They were people that worked for him, these two women. And there's a third that's come forward, and there's others in Iowa at a radio station, and I'm sure there's going to be countless others. How many of them are legit? I don't know. But Herman Cain had a debate with Newt Gingrich, and there's one definite philanderer. Now, we don't know if there was infidelity. And again, I guess you could dissect it. And yes, you could say if it's a thought crime, meaning if if you're thinking it, it's almost like doing it as it relates to judgment, sin, etc. Well, I'm not going there. I don't know enough. I'm not scholarly enough or spiritual enough to make those distinctions. But we'll deal more with the tangible. Now, we do know for a fact that the newtster needed to be neutered and that he was on the prowl. Now, Herman Cain might just think that being on the prowl is just, flirting, flattering, just playing with that energy, connecting with it, you have to realize, those of you ladies out there, that for men, when you guys, meaning you gals, give us a little attention, wow, it goes to our head. And it affects, I'm talking cerebrally, I'm talking about the upper head, okay? The bigger head. When you flatter, when you give us eye contact, when you smile, when you're pleasant, and if it goes beyond that, that really strokes a man's ego. Do you know that when someone, again, attractiveness is in the eye of the beholder, but a man whom considers a certain female attractive, their T levels, meaning their testosterone levels, can rise as much as in the range of 30 to 50% just by looking. So all these things affect mood, mentality, confidence, and certainly, it can certainly play with one's ego. And so these things sometimes, without actually committing the physical act, just the act of communication, some level of connection, can go long and far for a man. So anyway, so here you got, let's say, the flatterer and the philanderer debating, and they don't want to take any questions on these things. And you remember Newt Gingrich, who said that it was because of his patriotism, his passion and his patriotism that spilled over into this whole arena. You remember that. That's the newtster. Now, we do have candidates that seemingly have unblemished records as it relates to morality, and value, for the values voter. There's no flip-flopping on pro-life stances. Their positions are rock solid. They have there's no infidelity issues, There's no abuse or sexual harassment accusations. So maybe it's time to start looking, if you really are authentically conservative and you take seriously the social issues and values and morals and ethics and truth in all matters matter, then you really should be looking at other candidates that don't have this blemish, that don't have this black mark. Oh, I didn't. It's not racial. Relax. And there's no great white hope, black hope. There is no hope in mankind. The hope is in the Creator, and it goes beyond humankind. So that's why we need a constitution. That's why we need the Bill of Rights. That's why we have to have concrete standards, principles, ethics, morals. These are the things that keep mankind in check. Now, I was looking at, and I kind of like Mediaite. For me at least, it's kind of a good way of getting a commentary and analysis on the intersection between politics, the meshing of politics and the media. So apparently, here's one of the headlines: Howard Kurtz grills Politico's Jonathan Martin on Herman Cain's alleged sexual harassment reporting. So this is in the news. It's still big time. Okay, we don't care about Bonehead Boehner. Now, this is a name that should have major political implications. The significance of his statements should be duly noted. Not because I think he's that important, but he is a mouthpiece. He is a spokesman for the New World Order. And I made a prediction, a very bold one, prior to my comeback on talk radio. And that was that Bill Kristol mentioned Sarah Palin months before she was selected as the running mate for John McCain. And when I heard him on the Fox Follies as one of their commentators, remember he's the Weekly Standard guy, and he was the chief of staff that ran things for Dan Quayle. And he's a Zionist. He's a neocon. He loves all wars in the Middle East. That's our guy, Bill Kristol. That's with a K. So Bill Kristol, these are his statements on Fox News Sunday, and we're talking. And sometimes I give a date stamp, sometimes I don't. But if you look at the date on the published report, you'll know when these programs were produced and distributed. But we're talking Sunday, the 6th of November. Wow. And it was fall back, and so it was kind of nice getting that extra hour back, which is really what it should be anyway. Although the darkness creeped in, the nighttime came upon us. It's like, wow, it's darker now an hour earlier. So anyway, we're definitely deep into the fall and approaching winter time. And I didn't mention this, but I was watching the Rutgers game not only yesterday, Saturday, but the previous Saturday when we had the blizzard. I mean, wasn't that wild? I mean, just blizzard-like conditions, a lot of wet snow and what it caused for the Northeast. And in Oklahoma, by golly gee, I mean, you've got major earthquakes, and aftershocks, not just because of what's going on in the college football arena. So anyway, so much for the calamity and chaos in weather, and certainly let's get back to politics. So Bill Kristol is on the Fox News Sunday, November the 6th. And maybe they taped it yesterday. It doesn't matter. But anyway, it aired. And he threw cold water on Herman Cain's presidential candidacy, arguing that regardless of his popularity among conservative voters and whether or not his sexual harassment scandal will end up helping or hurting him, there was very little chance in the first place that he was ever going to be the Republican nominee. Now, doesn't this harken back to, and I've used this as a cornerstone example, that when Pat Buchanan ran for presidency, and he was a very formidable he was an underdog, but a formidable candidate he became against King George Bush Sr. I mean, Pat Buchanan won New Hampshire. He did very well in the Iowa caucus, and he was looking like he might win South Carolina, especially with the values voters and being an authentic social conservative. But the Republican hierarchy at the time, many of them came out on the various news programs and in the media outlets and stated that they would not allow Pat Buchanan to be their nominee. So it didn't matter what you, the voter, wanted. They were going to make sure somehow, some way, and they did. They sabotaged Pat Buchanan. They made sure that he could never get to the finish line and win enough states early on to be a serious contender for the throne. So I said all along that they weren't going to allow Herman Cain, although if he's a fallback candidate, you got to remember they have a backup plan and a backup to the backup plan. He would be suitable, but he was not their top choice. It is Romney primarily. Secondarily, it would be either Gingrich or Perry, because you have to be an internationalist. You have to be a globalist. Now, Herman Cain, he's just too politically inexperienced. I mean, if they would consider him as a VP, they would consider him a cabinet kind of guy, give him a cabinet position. But they weren't going to allow him. And when Bill Kristol speaks, believe me, he speaks for the neocons. He speaks for the upper crust of the Republican, the GOP party, no question. So there you go. So he's admitting that they're not going to allow him to be. Now, that also brings into question, I believe that the circumstances that Herman Cain is confronting from his accusers, I think the allegations based on settlement, I mean, who settles? I mean, what normal person says, pay that person off, pay them to shut their mouth and tell them to go away? No, you fight these things. So, okay, so if he wasn't willing to fight over this, and it showed that he can't even be candid and he can't be in control. That's the word I was looking for also, was he could not be in control of his own candidacy, his own campaign. And if this gave him a major body blow, just imagine when really serious stuff would confront him as it relates to our country and certainly the challenges of this new century. So okay, beyond that, Ron Paul says, not so sure I can support another GOP nominee. I'd like him to come out with much greater certainty and say, I cannot and will not. Ron has a tendency to kind of hold his cards close to the vest, which I don't have a problem with that. But he's being a little coy and a little bit evasive and elusive. I would just be real direct and say, under no circumstances could I do that. And I don't think that majority of the folks here would support me in that way. But again, he also said he felt like he was more part of the club. He was happier with the way he was being treated by the other candidates. And he's still running as a Republican. So anyway, I'm glad that at least he's casting doubt, and because he could not and did not last time. I'm going down this list here. Bachman goes after Cain for flip-flops. Well, he's not a serial offender. I mean, he's not like as George Will said about Romney, that he was a recidivist reviser of his principles and his politics and his policies. That just means that Mitt Romney is a political animal. He's a political predator. He's a chameleon, and he'll say and he will do whatever it takes to win that position. He is so driven and drunk with power and wanting more. That's what it's all about. It's not patriotism. Herman Cain blasts the media for sexual harassment questions after the debate with Gingrich. Yeah, the flatterer versus the philanderer. Wonderful. Um, let's see what else we've got here. Bum, 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 bum. Who cares about Bill Maher? I don't. Okay, so Huntsman's got some attractive daughters. Well, hey, Mondale did too. A lot of candidates have attractive children. So what? Okay, that's and who Ann Coulter. I mean, she is a provocateur. I mean, there's no question. She intentionally provokes so she can keep her name and her skeletal anorexic figure and bleach blonde hair and mascara in the headlines. I mean, what can I tell you? All right, so much for that. There were some headlines at Newsmax I wanted to touch on as well. But quite frankly, there are some other. Yeah, well, I got to get to the bank transfer day too. So we'll get to the mutiny of the banks, which I think is pretty cool. But while we're still on this story, let's see. It says Cain favorability drops after the allegations. So even though someone can be unfavorable, and we've seen this with the Bushes, we've seen this with Clinton, we've seen this with others, it doesn't mean that they're going to forego the candidate. It just means that they're less favorable. The voter or potential voter is less positive and affirming or less enthusiastic about the candidate. But it still does not bode well for Cain. Cain rips reporters and spurs harassment queries. Hey man, you should have just been candid, straight up, had the news conference, answered all the questions you could. Don't have political or professional amnesia, and that's what I would have done. So sometimes it's not, it's the cover up, or it's the fact that you're obfuscating what the facts might be, and it may not even be as bad as certain folks suspect. I just don't know. Obama's already gearing up for Romney. And again, I'm still predicting that Romney will be the nominee, no matter how much of a hypocritical he can be. Flip-flop artist. I still think that he's going to be able to bring together enough of the Republican Party, just like Dole was able to, just like John McCain was able to. And, I think the people are going to suck it up, and he'll be supported well enough. And I don't think the economy is going to improve to the extent. I mean, I would not be shocked if Obama was reelected. But I still think that Romney's going to edge him out. I don't think it's going to be any kind of blowout either way. And I think Romney will be the Republican nominee. And I think Romney, which you know how I feel about Romney, will not be. I don't think he's going to be denied. I think the money, the connections, and the fact is that this economy does not bode well for Obama. And Obama's accomplishments, at least in his mind, or in the minds of his supporters, I don't think are great enough to guarantee him re-election. So that's the way I see it. I want to just skedaddle over to, let me see how I'm doing on time here, because yeah, we're doing okay. All right. I want to go to, some of these reports are 15, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, nearly, an hour. So it just depends on how much time, how much material I have. But I do want to tell you this. I have plans to do many, many more reports, minis as well as extended, I have a wide range of subjects, and as it relates to teachings, as it relates to areas that I'm interested in, and I would hope that you would be interested in, that I think I could share not only certain information, but also be able to expound upon things that I have an expertise, or that I have a certain amount of experience, or perhaps even, you know, wisdom that I could pass on. So that's my hope, and so stay tuned for that. What am I doing? I thought I had Drudge up here. Why am I still on the same page? Okay, finally it refreshed. Okay, here's some of the top headlines. Drudge, Obama finally makes appearance, and it's got some, uh, I don't know, some kind of mascot or some kind of figure, but Obama is not at Zuccotti Park. Three arrested for dealing crack at Occupy Boston, alcohol fights. I mean, hey, I, I the violence I do not condone. And yes, is this is a subverted movement, a hijack movement, much like the Tea Party movement, but not violent. Tea Partiers have not shown, have not predicated their movement on violence, and it is a movement. But you can't just because the Tea Party movement was hijacked, and because it was, you had the interlopers, meaning the Republican Party, and in many instances some of the Tea Party groups were actually, instigated. Well, in some instances infiltrated, some instigated, meaning the genesis of some of those groups actually were derived from Republicans and Republican funding. So, but even with that said, there are some purists and there are some good folks in the Tea Party movement, in particular the Tea Party patriots. So I don't discount the whole movement, wholesale because of that. Just like in the Occupy movement, even though there's a lot of elements, including some of the top elements that I deplore and despise, there's still good people, a diverse range of people that are involved. If that was my movement, or if I was a major organizer, I would say, okay, folks, if you live in this city, go home, go get a bath, clean up, and have shifts where people are protesting. Have your placards out. Start organizing politically. But if you want to occupy, you can occupy without sleeping over. If in fact there's a small presence that would occupy, well then help. Well, first of all, keep the environment. And you're supposed to love the environment, right? Clean up after yourselves. And if there's park officials, if there's government officials, that have cleaning crews, work with them to allow them to do their job. Don't. I mean, if you're going to block something, okay, make your point and then move on. But don't hurt the common man because you want to block a bridge, a street, a building for countless hours, if not longer. That's just my take on that. This is interesting because this plays right into their hands. Wall Street more profitable now. The bonuses, the big bonuses are there. They're making more money, just like the oil companies are making more money than ever. But extreme poverty now is at record high levels. The unemployment, they're finally starting to realize that just because you're not part of the 99 weeks and you're not receiving unemployment benefits does not mean you are automatically employed. I've said for the longest time, if they tell you it's 9% unemployment, times it by 3. But many studies now are admitting. Now, earlier in the year, they said unemployment, the real unemployment, might be as high as 18%. Now they're saying it's over 20. But they're now saying that even with all these extensions, it's well over 50% of the unemployed are no longer on benefits. Well over that. That's the first time ever. So the Republicans don't have the guts, and the Democrats certainly don't, to say, let's readjust these figures. Let's really find out and have a better statistical model on what is the unemployment rate, the actual, the real. I mean, this is phony. It's fake. It is a fraud. It is a fix, because neither party wants to be, shackled with the truth that if in fact the unemployment rate is 15 or 20 or 25 or 30%, they'd rather say, hey, let's keep, the highest it might get to is 9, 10, 11, 12%. But they know that if the real numbers are stated factually, and people hear that day in and day out that 25% or 30% of the population is unemployed, how could any ruling party remain in power? And that's why they'll never truly revise them, and these are fictitious numbers, and fallacious. I mean, it's total falsehood. Let me check. I got to check my timer here. Wow, time is flying. I don't know where time goes, but again, thank you for listening and appreciate it very much. We're going to get to this Penn State issue at some point, but let me get back to Bankersville. We now know that mutiny of the banks, which was regarding the greedy fees. It was called Bank Transfer Day, and I think it's banktransferday.com, where so many people transferred their money to credit unions, small banks. And these are individuals that just said got fed up. And so they're finding these smaller banks that will waive fees. Guess what? For every dollar that you have deposited with any and all banks, they now can loan out 20 for that one. So you've increased their not only their liquidity, and you've given them more stability, because they have so little in reserve. That's why it's called fractional reserve. So they can now loan out 20 to 1 on each dollar you put in. It gives them that 20 to 1 fictitious bank account total. I mean, their books are going to show that they have, at least based on the banking rules of the Federal Reserve System, the fractional reserve model, that for every dollar, it's 20 times that in actuality in bankingdom. Okay, so I want to applaud those that said mutiny of the big banks, and we're not going to tolerate these fees. We're not going to be picked apart, because remember, they're trading that money in currencies and in investments, and the T-bills, the mutual funds, all kinds of different things that they can do to make a profit. And so just by virtue of your money in that account, they are making obscene profits, because they know how to invest it. They know how to leverage your dollars. You're not receiving the profits, they are. So don't feel sorry and say, oh, well, it's free market, and we feel so badly for them. You really shouldn't. Absolutely, positively not. So I want to applaud those that have taken on the big banksters and gangsters on so many different levels. But there's got to be an action plan. It's got to go beyond just placards. It's got to go beyond just occupying. It's got to go beyond, and it certainly should not be. It should be nonviolent. It should be proactive, but politically active and engaged and productive. Okay, you have to say, where is this going? What do I stand for? What is it? What's to be ascertained? What's to be accomplished? It's got to be goal-driven, goal-oriented. I am Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Till we meet again, I hope that God will bless you and God bless our great country. And keep listening and check us out at TomDonahueReports.com. Make sure you go to the website, TomDonahueReports.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter. All that information is there at TomDonahueReports.com.